with Speed City, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms. Google Analytics says we have a 7% chance of having a female watching us, listening. So there's a chance. This is John Massengale. I'm in the studio and joined
It's
by
all fake news.
joined by Jonathan Green over Zoom. And let me run down what we got on the show because we put together what I think is going to be a fun show because we just got back from Miami a few days ago. We're going to talk about the race. We're going to talk about the experience and our experience and everything else. And we're going to talk about some eyebrow raising Miami TV ratings from ESPN. Got a story about a current F1 driver, maybe about to lose his drive. We're going to talk about we have a little update on the Andretti F1 bid. And we're going to talk about the Red Bull juggernaut, as I've dubbed it in our notes. And maybe a surprise. We have a big series talking about coming back here to Austin to Circuit of the Americas. Jonathan Green, how are you, buddy?
Good, man. How are you? Yeah, still recovering from Miami, but what an event. Very impressive. And a great weekend.
It was. I mean, honestly, for us, it was kind of surreal, Jonathan. It felt like it for me because we did so much out there because we did the PA. You and Bob primarily anchored that, and then I primarily anchored the radio. And going back and forth between those two booths, which happened to be on opposite sides of the giant Hard Rock Stadium. Jonathan, we got up there Thursday morning, and it took me about a half a day to map out the quickest route between those two booths. And I think I got it down with a brisk walk to 7 minutes. So, but man, wasn't that just to start with just the venue and the changes they made? And it's just, wide-eyed. I saw Max Verstappen doing the wide-eyed look as he walked inside of Hard Rock Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many different nuances that they'd upgraded from the year before, including using the stadium, which I think was a great idea for a paddock, and also giving the GA fans a chance to kind of poke in and have a look at the paddock. The Drive to Survive is all based on the paddock. So to actually see it in life and in reality, and seeing people like Ricardo and Hamilton with his various different garbs. And, I think it was they knocked it out of the park. And also it seems that Garfunkel and his team have definitely listened to the feedback and improved where they can. And as you say, there was rumor that they may be trying to go one better again next year by doing a night race, which, as you well know, just to give you an idea, I happened to talk to George Barber, who runs Barber Motorsport, about his resurfacing of that track, and that was 10 million. So imagine a track the size of Miami, which is longer and more sort of tough to do.
More complex, probably, yeah.
More complex. It's a lot of money they're putting out there. And then to do a night race like Singapore, well, that's again another multi-million-dollar undertaking, because those lights, A, aren't cheap, and B, they have to be right, because you are expecting people to fly down that back straight at over 210 miles an hour. Well, they better be able to see.
Yeah, and I've talked about this, I think even on one of our shows, where the lighting with LED lighting now taking over incandescent. I bet there's all sorts of interesting things you can do with the lighting, and I'd like to know what they do at places like Singapore and other places where the cars just pop. Remember how it just looks amazing at night? But man, wouldn't Miami just be a spectacle? I mean, it would kind of take it to the next level, almost Vegas-like.
Yeah, and I mean, the Europeans complained about it being a razzmatazz, typical American affair, but every Grand Prix in every country is a homage, if you will, to the country that you're going to. So when you're in Hungary or Argentina or Brazil, you get a flavor for that country and what they do best. And I said this on the radio last week. You may not like LL Cool J and big flashing lights and the big intros, but that's America. That's how NASCAR do it. That's how boxing does it. That's how that's what America's known for. So, to kind of poo-poo it just because there's a bunch of Europeans and it's a European-based series, I think it's a hollow criticism in some ways.
I know. We get it every year. And, I mean, look, let's embrace the cultural differences, right? Of every race we go to. So, when we go to some of the Middle East races, the topic of human rights pops up, and
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story. But still, let's embrace each one.
And in England, they stand in line and they get wet and they camp. That's it.
Yeah, and they're all very polite to each other.
And they clap like this.
uh, and the race was, I think they said the published numbers was 270,000, which is up from 240,000 in 2022. They had those huge grandstands right behind where we were. We were right, our PA booth was right at pit lane exit, which was fantastic, by the way. And the grandstands were just back a couple of turns from us, the new ones, should say. And I don't know how many that grandstand looked like. It would hold 20 or 30,000 people all by itself, that new grandstand.
Yeah, that AutoNation grandstand. Yeah. By the way, I want to talk about AutoNation later because I read something that not alerted me. Well, it alerted me. So we'll
Yeah.
talk about that later.
Yeah. Well, let's keep talking about Miami because there were several. I mean, one is the TV ratings. We put that in the show doc here, and they were great TV ratings, but they were down pretty significantly from last year. And the first thing that jumped out at me though was how the young demographic was still super strong for Formula One. And one of the reasons that they think that may have been down is they truly were head to head with a NASCAR race, right? Although the NASCAR race was not on free to air, it was on I think FS1, but the numbers it was actually down 30% because they averaged a 1.0 rating and 1.96 million viewers, and which was last year a 1.3 rating and 2.58 million viewers. But this still ranks as the second largest live audience ever on U.S. television, including tape delayed, and ranks third behind Miami and of all time in the United States, behind Monaco 2002, 2.78 million. So, does this concern you that this could be a trend, or that maybe F1 has jumped the shark, as they say?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's the old new thing in town last year, and so therefore there's a curiosity. And I think that audience was fine for where we are. Red Bull have won every race.
Yeah,
I think it's I think it makes sense that the crowd, the younger skewing crowd, compared perhaps to the European crowd, is younger, and how they're watching it, whether it be on their phone, on iPad, or whatever they're doing, I think is different. I think a lot more people are now tuning in on F1 Pro, i.e., on their computers, rather than necessarily having cable. In fact, I'm almost certain of it. That very few people of an age between 18 and 30
yeah.
have ESPN, for example. And if they do, it's on an app. So I would have said that here in America, the app has won out, whether it be F1 Pro or whether it be ESPN's app. I really do.
Yeah, and so here are the numbers. Formula One in the 18 to 49 demographic had a rating of 0.61, and that's almost double the 0.33 that NASCAR recorded. So I tell you what, if I were Formula One, I'd take the loss overall to NASCAR with the win in the young demo any day for the growth of the
Yeah.
sport.
Yeah, and we said it all along. I mean, 5 years ago, we were talking about the only way to grow Formula One in America was to have two or three races, which we now have, but also an awareness of when those races are on. And unfortunately, given that there are so many races in Europe, they are early in the morning, or in Japan's case or Australia's case, late at night. So it's like having an Olympics in a country in New Zealand, for example. It's hard because you're completely on a different time zone. They're running, their Sunday is our Monday, their Monday is our Sunday. So it's tough when you're dealing with time zones, and you've got to try to, and that could be another reason why Miami wants to run a night race, is so that it hits, as Vegas are trying to do. It hit all ships. So it's Saturday night in Vegas, and it's Sunday morning in Europe. And I think Miami could do something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, night races are so cool to watch, and in a place like Miami, I think it'd be amazing. Hey, you linked to a story that Chris Medlin wrote about can Miami become the event it aspires to be? What do you think
Yeah,
about that? Yeah.
I, and it's an interesting headline because in it there's a lot of quotes about how they upgraded it. But I think it answers the question you had, which is, does this drop in numbers? I mean, we know that there were still tickets for sale, unlike last year, where you couldn't get a hire car to change it, to change your world. But that was post-COVID. I also think the Miami event last year, again post-COVID, was everybody curious, everybody coming out of their houses. So I think that was a factor too. Um, you know, yeah.
And
Garfunkel's quote was, our focus is right now on investing in a great experience," and I think you'd have to say that it was a good experience. The fans did get to see their heroes; they did get to walk the pit lane, and however much that might be, and those prices will come down as the years go on. But right now it's Vogue, and when all the stars are there, type thing. You're at the center of the planet. You're in the it crowd, and so that's what they were vibing on, and I think they achieved that. Roger Federer, Serena Williams, Tiesta,
it goes
all
on and
these
on. I
great,
mean, yeah.
yeah, the Jonas Brothers. I mean, God,
You
so
got to hang out with Tom Cruise, didn't you?
oh, we had a long chat. It's about 4 seconds. But yeah, Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt's, Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer of the movie, was there. Brad's going to be racing or practicing in an F2 car. But the vibe is huge. They're doing multi-million-dollar movies that will come out with people like Brad Pitt. So the vibe was good. So to answer the headline, yes, I think it already has become the event it aspires to be, which is it fits with Austin. It doesn't boast an audience of 400,000. Austin's a very different event, and Vegas will be a very different event.
Yeah. And look, you talk about him, Tom Garfinkel.
Excuse me.
Yeah, he's the CEO of the Miami Dolphins. And
I got all his albums.
it's funny you say that. I did the same mistake on the Wheel to Wheel show on Wednesday, but they addressed all the shortcomings from 22 to 23, or most of them, the big ones, the track itself, and adding some more stands, grandstands. And so I'm sure they're doing exactly the same thing and just going to review this and make any changes. So
I think the biggest difference was the adding, and I kind of underlined it in my notes, the adding of 61 new hospitality areas. Now that's a huge amount. So I think that's something bearing in mind, and of course that's going to bring major revenue in from big corporates like Chase, like Oracle, like McLaren and their sponsors. I really do think that's where they're going to make their money.
Yep. All right. Well, coming up after this, we're going to talk about an American that had his home race at the Formula One race, Logan Sargeant. Coming up after this. Listen to Sunday Night with Speed City. Back after these messages.
Hello to everyone. This is Guenther Steiner. This is Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
Thank you, Guenther Steiner, for bringing us back. We're going to talk about Guenther Steiner later in this show. But as promised, we're going to talk about Logan Sargeant, because our young American in Formula One, which is amazing to say, right? How many years have we tried to say that, Jonathan? But he had basically a home race. He was born and raised about 15 miles down the road. Well, what would you give him for, I was going to say a grade for Miami, but you know what? I'll take that. How about 5 race grade, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, it was an unfortunate weekend for the youngster, and not by any fault of his own. He wasn't overawed. Let's just put that in perspective, because if you look at the results, you'd say he was out of his depth and he's last and on the grid, but that's not how it panned out by any means. It was the tightest grid perhaps in the history of the sport, 1.2 seconds, I think. And then the 3 guys that were ahead of him when he was knocked out were a 1/10 of a second, no more. Ahead of him, all of them. So he got the rub of the green. He didn't get the rub of the green, as they say. And it was an unfortunate weekend because he wanted it to be so good. And I don't think he's not a shirking violet. He'll jump out at Imola and he'll be fine. It just was a weekend that didn't go his way.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty good way to put it. And we have we talked about it on I think on the post race show, maybe Chris and I on the wheel to wheel. Just that he said it. He said it after the fact. The race just didn't come to me. He made a mistake at the beginning of the race, and
Yes, he did.
yep. And but really after that he, it just didn't come to him.
And you know what? Parallel that with Magnussen's mistake at the beginning of the race. Fourth on the grid, didn't get the start, down to 6th, down to 7th, and backwards he went. It can happen.
Yeah, exactly. It can happen to the best of them. I mean, circumstance. Look at what happened to Max Verstappen in qualifying. So it can happen to any driver at any time. But look, let's talk about him 5 races in. And yeah. I know we don't have tons of great results, but all the intangibles feel positive, right? I mean, I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and the best way to parallel it is to look at Latifi's time at Williams, which was unfortunate for him, and look at Albon and Sargeant's time at Williams, when Williams clearly are on the up and up. They have a new boss. They have the benefits of the Doralton capital that has now been made, i.e. it's growing again as a team. They've got Duracell, they've got Stevens, they've got lots of different names on the car. Williams are back on the up and up, and Latifi's career was never going to kick off at Williams, given the car just wasn't there for him. He was making schoolboy errors, so to speak, now and again, but not that bad. And I really do think that at least Sargeant and Albon are now benefiting from a competitive car in straight line. I mean, the Williams was fastest, and they've been ahead of the Mercedes team at times. Their benefactor in terms of engine. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see more from Williams. Whether they fight for 4th in the championship, I doubt. But will they potentially be 5th or 6th, having been a 10th for many years? Yes.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to talk about Logan Sargeant is that he, like what you just said, he said it, in a quote, he said, "I can't wait for the European triple header. I'm giving it everything. I just need to string it all together." I think he's optimistic because of the same thing that we're feeling, right? Is that he's been quick, and he's going to make mistakes, but I'm glad he seems to be having fun doing it and taking it seriously at the same time. So I have hope for our American driver.
Yeah, and put him in Albon's position a few years ago at Red Bull. I'm glad he's not in that position, because that was hiding to hell. Albon was always going to be compared to Verstappen and criticized for not being as quick. And eventually it led to his demise, as it did with Kvyat and many others. So I think he's in a perfect position to learn his way in Formula One in a team that isn't having high expectations. He's not in the maelstrom of Alpine. He's not in the underperforming McLaren. He's not in AlphaTauri, where everybody's on the bubble, as it were, in terms of a job. So I think he's in the great place.
All right, let's talk about Red Bull. And I preface this with the Red Bull juggernaut, because you said it. We've won all 5 races. They've been 1-2 in 4 of the 5. And it still feels like we don't know how fast this car is. We really don't know how big the gap is to the rest of the field. I feel like they just kind of push it as much as they need to win every race, is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, you get that feeling, don't you?
Yeah.
It is total domination, and everybody's been talking about the 7 million loss in the accounting, which, like I said, is a whole bag of worms that I don't want to get into. But they say that it will sort of filter out and will level out in terms of development. I don't know. I don't see it myself. I think Adrian Newey and Red Bull have kind of dialed in a really good, efficient car that works with the ground effects and works with the tires. They can make those tires last, as we've seen with Checo, and now with Verstappen to a certain extent. The length he went on those hard tires, and they basically, like I said, the signal for the weekend for me was Red Bull giving Verstappen the go-ahead to push after somewhat 30 plus laps on those hard tires. So they were watching them carefully, but they felt that he'd done enough, and the car had given it an efficiency enough that the tires were still there was still plenty of grip left on those tires, and he used it to great effect. And that's how he won the race.
Well, we have a great clip when Chris Medlin caught up with Christian Horner, and this was from our post-race show in Miami. But let's play this clip from Christian Horner.
Christian, middle of this stadium, there's music pumping outside, a party I'm sure you want to get to at the moment, because another 1-2 in the can and done so impressively. Just how happy are you with the way you executed that race?
Oh, look, a brilliant race, great performance by the whole team. I mean, Max's middle stint was quite outstanding, and so to get our 5th victory, 4th 1-2 finish, we couldn't have dreamt of that, before the season.
Any trepidation when you were letting the two race in that final stint? I guess you really wanted Max to get that pit stop and get out ahead, so there was no fighting needed on track, didn't you?
Well, we discussed it before the race and said, look, guys, at some point you're bound to come across each other, but if you do, keep it clean and race, with respect for the team and for each other. And they did exactly that today, and it was firm racing, but fair racing between the two of them.
Yeah, were you surprised at the progress Max made so quickly? I mean, I know you've got a car that can do that, but on this track that looked tricky, we thought there'd be incidents, and it just seemed so clean from him.
That was remarkable. I mean, even when he was in traffic, he never dropped more than 5.5 seconds behind the leader. And that was crucial for his race today. And I think that he was very efficient how he came through the field. And then obviously, between lap 20 and 42, his pace was so strong on tires that were 20 laps older than Checo's. That was where he did the damage. So when he put the mediums on and was only a couple of seconds behind, with 10 laps to go, or 12 laps to go, that was, he'd already done the hard work.
Well, it was great that we saw your two drivers racing for the win and giving us something to watch, but there wasn't a lot of drama in the race today. There weren't any yellow flags, I think, no interruptions, no retirements. Is something missing here with this circuit? What do you put that down to?
Sometimes you get races like that, and then in the next race there could be yellow flags, red flags, the whole lot, So every chapter of the book is slightly different.
And a lot of talk about other teams and their upgrade package trying to chase you guys down. What's your upgrade plan looking like? Are you heading to Imola with some new parts as we get back to racing in Europe?
Well, we're having to pick and choose where we apply the parts. So with the penalty that we're carrying, with the restriction in development time, we have to be very selective with that. So I'm sure our update will perhaps be more modest than others.
Does it worry you at all, though, with the car you've got? I mean, you just look imperious right now.
Well, you just never know. You just got to do the best job you can with the tools that you have, and I think the team are doing such a wonderful job. There's such strength and depth that we have in the team across all areas.
I thought that was telling, John. He mentioned what we talked about just before, which is the development clampdown, if you will, for they. So basically, if you were under a rock, Red Bull was seen to exceed the budget cap last year and were fined $7 million in development. So they have $7 million they can't spend, or they can't perhaps spend as much as some of the other teams. And he alluded to that fact that the upgrades that they'll do may, in some ways, be more conservative. I like the way he put it, but it basically means they're not going to be flamboyant about their spending. I mean, whether we believe him or not is here or there, but I actually personally don't believe it's going to stymie them. And these cycles of development, begin a long time ago. So it's now a case of taking what is a missile and nurturing that missile to the end of 2023.
Yeah, even if they are more conservative, even if he's telling the truth and the other teams are going to close the gap, like I mentioned earlier, there may be more gap that we don't even know about yet. So, but even if they did close the gap, I think it's going to be really hard for anybody to even take a whiff at.
I mean, no one has. Let's just get this clear. You watch IndyCar and there's 6 different winners and 6 races. No one has won a race outside of Red Bull this year.
Yeah.
We're getting on to a quarter towards the season. We get out of Spain in 3 weeks. If that is the case after Spain in early June, then this could be a McLaren record-setting type year, or a Mercedes Rosberg Hamilton kind of year.
And we had all these visions of grandeur of Checo winning another street circuit in Miami and making this a championship with more street circuits to go, but that didn't happen. And I wrote in my notes, the relationship between Checo and Max that we already know is strained after last year. If Max keeps doing what he's doing, it's not going to matter, is it?
Nope, it really isn't. I really do think that there is places that could trip them up, Imola and Monaco. And Monaco, obviously, anything can happen. It's easy to see what we saw in Miami, which is Max having to settle for ninth when qualifying was curtailed. If that happens again in Monaco, and it did last year, and he blamed Checo, again, that's the sort of thing from ninth that he would really struggle at Monaco, because it is that much harder to overtake. So there are things that could trip them up. Their reliability has not been a problem, although they have complained about gear shifting and they have complained about braking, certainly in Australia with Checo. So it's not perfect, but certainly that Red Bull, if any of the cars are bulletproof, the Red Bull is.
Yeah. All right. Well, coming up after this, we are going to talk about a potential driver losing his seat in Formula One. And of course, later in the show, we're going to talk about the Andretti F1 bid. You're listening to Sunday Night with Speed City. Back after this.
Hi, this is Karun Chandok, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, welcome back. Before we talk about a driver losing his seat potentially, Jonathan, let's talk about the Alpine. What was the story that you put in there? The kind of a sneaky little story.
Well, Szafnauer responds to CEO Rossi's pressure. So Rossi, the CEO of Alpine and Renault, basically went on French TV and on F1 TV or F1.com, and basically said that he was completely dissatisfied. He wants Alpine to finish fourth in the championship, and frankly, in his words, it's been a disastrous start to their campaign, and he's kind of footing the bill at Szafnauer's feet.
I think kind of is an understatement.
Well, it's an understatement. Yeah, he's basically blaming the management team. Now, Szafnauer is not back and said, look, the work goes on in Enston and Viry, which is in France, and that's where the car is either made brilliant or not. The two drivers came together at Melbourne, but that was not planned, and it was an accident and a racing incident. They just had a lot of bad luck. But what really caught my eye, and this is from grandprix.com, which is Joe Sayed's website, and he's a learning man. And by the way, I apologize, Joe, for interrupting you when you were talking to Guenther Steiner, and I barged in and talked to him on the grid. But there you go. But he said, as Rossi was making these comments, rumors swirled around the Miami paddock that Renault-owned Alpine may be in talks about a team takeover with AutoNation, an American auto retailer. Now, and also Renault's CEO, Luca De Meo, was also in Miami. So you've got the head of Alpine, Rossi, and you've got the head of CEO of Renault. Now, why that struck my interest was for two reasons. One, Michael Andretti was there. And as we know, the original deal with Gamebridge and all the rest of it was Colton Herta. But Kyle Kirkwood was there representing AutoNation, and who he is sponsored with Andretti. So my point is, I still believe, and I do, when we looked at Andretti's hopes of getting into Formula One, we almost all agree that no one's got the stomach for an 11th franchise unless somebody's willing to pay for it. And all boats rise, it's just great, but the pot gets less for each of those teams if Andretti joins. Not so if they buy into a team. And my question is, who could sell a team? And the answer is Red Bull. Because Red Bull have a second team, AlphaTauri. So
yeah, that I like. I like these. I like this theory because it's good, and the fact that all the players were there, including Luca De Meo from Renault and Rossi from Alpine and Kyle Kirkwood, like we talked about after winning his first race in IndyCar a couple of weeks ago. To me, that just put Kyle Kirkwood back where he on the trajectory that we knew that he was going to be on at some point. He just had struggled in his first year in IndyCar, and no telling. But yeah, that's really interesting, Jonathan. And then of course, let's lead right into this because I put in the show that we're going to talk about Andretti, and the rumors were, and not rumored. The only thing that was said by Michael that I saw anywhere was that he might have an answer by mid-July.
Well, I can confirm that because I did speak to him on the grid, and that's exactly what he said. He said, all systems go.
I didn't realize you caught him. That's great, dude.
Yeah. I spoke to him on the
PA.
grid.
Yeah. Okay.
On the PA, yeah. And I said to him, Michael, what's the latest? And that was my question. And he politely said, well, we're still going forward. We're still, our bid is in there, and we expect to see. And if you want to know what the bid is, it's for Andretti Autosport in conjunction with Cadillac to come in as a new franchise for Formula One, of which there could be as many as 13. The teams may be quite vociferous about not wanting it, but that really isn't their choice. It's the FIA and Formula One's choice, not the teams. And so, he is in with a good chance, but I do believe that buying a existing franchise, as he originally tried to do, is his best hope. Now he tried to get Sauber, or what it was back then, and things change quickly in Formula One. So I don't know. I'm just hopeful that Michael gets in, and I think that would be the consolidation of America's input into the sport. And that would really consolidate it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one, though, Jonathan. I like that. All right, let's talk about a driver that may lose his seat. I mean, and honestly, this is not surprising, is it?
No, Nyck de Vries, world champion in his own right in Formula E, and has, on the way up, done everything a driver can be expected to do. He's had a similar upbringing to, Sargeant and many others that have come through Formula 2. But it's just not gone his way, and he's had silly mistakes. And unfortunately, as we all know, Helmut Marko is not one to be patient. Now, the rumors after Miami are that Ricciardo could potentially take the seat. I don't think that's realistic.
Well, Nyck de Vries was one of the feel-good stories of last year. And like you said, he's had a great career, and he did well last year. And we thought, this is perfect. He's probably going to come in and do an adequate job, but he just has not this year. And it's disappointing because that was a fun story, but why don't you think Ricciardo would do this?
I think Ricciardo would be happy to do it, but he has said that he wants to be in a top team. So does he gain anything by putting himself in a situation where he's being compared to a relative rookie in Tsunoda, who's dialed in now? He's just come off what was his worst ever season in a competitive car, or relatively so, at McLaren.
But an F1 seat is an F1 seat.
I agree. And don't get me wrong, I think if he was offered it, he would take it. I don't think it's the right direction for Helmut Marko, and I don't think it sends a signal to all those waiting in the wings, a la the 8 Red Bull drivers, Crawford included, that all want to be in that Formula One seat. And Lawson, no question about it, is the odds-on favorite for that seat. And I'll give you a little bit of inside baseball here. I think it's more likely for 2 reasons. One, Helmut has been very generous in his praise of Lawson, and Lawson went straight from Japan to Baku. He's already started his Super Formula campaign and has been on great form. He's been there at most of the races. He's ready. He's tested the car. His times are good. And my inside baseball note is, guess who his roommate was when they were living in Milton Keynes?
Who?
Yuki Tsunoda.
That I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, so they lived together. Well, they met each other at the Toyota Racing Series, which Lawson won, and Tsunoda was 3rd or 4th, I think. But they became good friends, and they both went back to Europe, and they both did F2. And I believe that, like I said, they shared. I remember seeing some video from Red Bull of him helping Yuki pack up to go to Europe. Pretty funny.
And what do you think about Yuki's year?
The more and more I see of Yuki, the more impressed I am. I mean, yeah, sure, he gets some issues on the radio, but so does Hamilton.
It's funny that we seem to talk about that a lot, which is obvious because he does get so emotional. But if you just take that out, he's kind of overshadowing his own pretty decent season, isn't he?
Yeah, it's the old story of motor racing. You can't dial in speed, but you can dial it out. And what I mean by that is he's fast enough, and Marco has said so, and his overtakes have been excellent. He's a clean racer. He's an aggressive racer, and sure, he's got a temperament, which is actually good for a Japanese. We're so used to this
unusual,
shy and quiet Japanese who, frankly, beat themselves by being not strong enough mentally and verbally to their team. Not so with Yuki. He is born and raised. He came through the Carlin. He learned his English from Carlin mechanics. God help us. But he's got all the swear words. He's got all the he's got all the chutzpah of a non-Japanese, and I mean that in the most polite way. I don't think it's going to shock anybody to learn that the Japanese are very reserved and quiet and non-assuming people, and yet with a bit of fire in their belly, the Japanese can do anything.
Yeah, and plenty of great tradition of race car drivers coming out of Japan too.
Sure. Absolutely. And I do think that in the last 3 years, we've seen Tsunoda grow up. And I think he's a measure for anybody in the seat opposite, including De Vries. And I think that's actually adding to De Vries's problem, is that De Vries came in to save the day. I say save the day, but, got the opportunity when Gasly went. And I think that, I think Yuki's holding his own.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem you've got is that Red Bull, Helmut Marko, they just have a track record of not being patient. So,
and I'll tell you why I think Lawson rather than Ricciardo. I think it's obvious that at some point somebody is going to replace Checo at Red Bull.
Yeah,
a bad season, a falling out between the two of them, or Verstappen making good on his promise to leave the sport if they mess with it anymore. But Red Bull are looking for, in AlphaTauri, the next guy. And the next guy is not Daniel Ricciardo. So the next guy is Lawson.
Yeah. And how soon are they saying the possible, these rumors, of De Vries?
They promised De Vries 3 more races to come good. And so you might be seeing, by Silverstone, a new driver in that car if things don't go better. We'll keep an eye on it at Imola. I feel for him. It's a horrible. I mean, this is the underbelly of the sport, and unfortunately, I like Marco, but I don't like the way he puppeteers his drivers and dangles that. I mean, look, we could do a whole documentary on the revolving door that is the Red Bull driver, and it's tough. And unfortunately, Verstappen, is the benchmark, and until somebody steps up and starts beating him, and if I had to put money on whether it would be Lawson or Ricciardo, I'd say it would be Lawson.
Yeah, it's like all these stories come out of Red Bull every time. The disappointment, and we've seen it. We've Gasly and Albon that it sometimes can end good, even though it's probably devastating at the time. So
yeah,
hey,
we'll see. It's going to be interesting, but keep an eye on De Vries for Imola. He needs a good result. He needs to finish in the top 12.
I saw a really cool story about Aston Martin. Obviously, the Alonso story is I was going to say the feel-good story, but it's hard to say that with Alonso because he has been a bit of a villain at times. But I think it's a feel-good story of the year.
Oh, it's a feel-good story for sure.
Him doing so well. But Aston Martin, I saw this little article talking about how many of their road cars that they have sold. They've sold between 300 and 400 of the Vantage F1 edition cars. And that's $60 to $80 million in sales for the road cars. That's a cool story, isn't it? The old race on Sunday, sell on Monday.
Yeah, it is. And to be honest, I mean, you're a better judge of this. You keep your thumb on the auto market better than I do, but I would say that is a huge revitalization of the mark for Aston Martin. They've been very successful in sports car racing, but really, when you look at McLaren and Ferrari and Lamborghini, you wouldn't put Aston Martin in that same sales area. But now you can. And in fact, I would argue that they are rivaling a supercar manufacturer like McLaren very quickly. And if they've sold that many of these supercars, I think that bodes well for using the F1 mark, just as Ferrari do, and just as McLaren do, to sell their cars on Monday, as you said.
That's a good point, that they could put a little pressure on McLaren. I'm thinking of who they would steal sales from. And yeah,
well, Mercedes, McLaren, Lamborghini, Ferrari.
Ferrari, Lamborghini, and McLaren, I think would be the top. I mean, but Mercedes as well. But yeah, that's interesting. All right, well, let's go ahead and get a quick break in, and when we come back, we got a couple more stories to talk about, including a potential big series coming back to Circuit of the Americas. You're listening to Sunday Night with Speed City. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Tony Stewart, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, for our final segment, I want to start with, we've talked about Guenther Steiner's book, and Jonathan, I have started listening to the audiobook. I don't know, I think at the close to the end of chapter 2, maybe the beginning of chapter 3, and I freaking love it. And it's really good. And I mean, there's some insights in there. He talks about budgets and things like that, which I'm sure are public, but it's kind of cool to hear him talk about that. But we have a clip that we can play because it's from Audible, and they're putting it out to help generate buzz about the book. And it's something you talked about, how he starts off the book. But let's play this clip from Guenther's book.
It probably won't surprise many people that I'm starting my book with a swear word. But all I can say is, thank fuck that season is over. It's been a nightmare from start to finish. I don't drink very much, but this year I've been tempted to take it up professionally. Whiskey on a fucking drip. That's what I needed sometimes. It hasn't just been this year, though. The shit goes back even further than that. Being kicked out of Melbourne at the start of 2020 was probably where it all started.
Okay, that's 3 swear words in the first 30 seconds of the book. That is the actual first 30 seconds.
Can I, as a big proponent of my good friend Casey, who works very hard, why would you give him extra work?
I did.
Why would you do that?
I did.
Why
say
would
to
you do that?
Casey, were you bleeping these out for the local radio? They're going to play them on YouTube, but not on the local radio show.
Good.
But Jonathan, the book, it's so good, and I was honestly, as much as we've interacted with Guenther, and I'm as well as I can interpret his accent, there's still a word or two that I struggled with, but it's really, really good. It's a fascinating entrepreneurial story too, because it talks about how Guenther, we have to remember that this was basically Guenther's idea. In fact, not basically, it was Guenther's idea. And Jonathan, you'll love it because, you and I always talk about how to grow Speed City. And this is exactly what he's doing. He's talking about this idea of how to get this Formula One team. And it's the classic story in chapter 2 where he talks about he goes to F1 and he presents his PowerPoint, literally presents his PowerPoint. And then just sits by the phone and sits by his email and he goes a month with nothing happening. It's really, really.
I would have fucked the whole paddock.
It's a really good story. And I very much encourage anybody who is a fan of F1 to listen to the book or
know what the secret. You know what the secret sauce is, I think? It's not just his style and the swear words and all the rest of it. Guenther is bringing to Formula One what actually never really was part of Formula One, which was team managers being honest. When you look at the Ron Dennis days and I look at the Frank Williams days, and I'm not saying that they were all liars or whatever, but they never gave you an insight into what was really going on in the team, whereas Guenther can't help himself. He is a typical Austrian, and ironically, with Franz Tost also there, and with Toto Wolff also there, you still got the Machiavellian Christian Horner who'll tell you anything. But I do think that he has pushed the other team managers into force, through Drive to Survive and through his words and through this book now, into actually telling it like it is. He reminds me actually of Paul Stoddard, the former Minardi boss, who I read a great article in F1 Business about, where he too lays it all out about the deals and how he went about trying to join the shark tank that is Formula One, and it's not for the weak of heart.
I will say the swear word pace slows down quite a bit after the first 30 seconds. So, but it's really good. It's really good. And John, I don't
Get the
think.
audio version.
Yeah, yeah. And I was really excited to ask that question in front of the world audience. I did it at the press conference in Miami. I asked him. I said, hey, I couldn't imagine listening to or reading that book any other way but listening to it in your voice. I said, how's it selling? And he didn't know yet because it's too early, but I'm excited about it. But hey,
another good book is How to Be a Racing Driver by Jensen Button. I read that in New Zealand, and that's another good, honest book. Jensen's very self-effacing and very honest about what his career was all about.
Yeah. Speaking of excited, we got the potential of a new race, or a race coming back really to COTA, and that is WEC possibly coming back to COTA next year. And this was actually a story came out a few weeks ago, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it. But WEC boss Frederick Legwin refused to confirm or deny anything about this, but he said they are currently negotiating and discussing some countries. And as we know, you and I got to do the play-by-play the last time they were at COTA because they filled a gap that dropped off the calendar. Remember, it was right before the pandemic. It was January 2020, and they came back. But wouldn't that be cool to have them come back? And I'd really love it if they were, made it a regular spot on the calendar at COTA.
I do too. I mean, COTA's certainly got the bandwidth for it. I mean, now MotoGP and Formula One and NASCAR. I mean, to be honest, WEC would be the triumvirate. That would be. I mean, you can't get any bigger than that. To have those four. I mean, the only other thing would be Indy, and there's every chance that could happen again sometime down the road. But yeah, WEC would be great. They're talking about it. Well, first of all, they're talking about not going back to Sebring. The opener is going to be in Qatar in March. So that begs the question, so when would it be? And in the article that you put up in the doc, they were talking about it potentially being in the summer. Now, I think that would be a mistake unless you run it at night with lights.
Even then, the track is going to be crazy hot still.
I know. And that's why, I mean, if you remember, the reason the X Games kind of gave up on Austin a little bit was they did it in July and June and July, and it's just too hot.
Yeah. I mean, look,
I would like to see it become, I don't care where they put it on the calendar for next year because it's probably already in stone. But I think it should be the season opener in February or March.
Yeah, that would fit right with our weather because, we can. How many times have you turned on the 10 o'clock news and it's still 90 degrees at night here in Austin at 10 o'clock during the summer, during July or August? So yeah, that would not work very well. But yeah, we got a couple more stories. Jonathan, what about this one about IndyCar warning F1 about trademark breaches? That is interesting. I hadn't seen this.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any litigation here, but I think there was some nudgings from Penske and from Doug Bowles. On two occasions, Formula One have dropped the ball a bit, calling what they were doing in Miami the greatest spectacle in racing. As we all know, the greatest spectacle in racing is the Indy 500. Now, who said it? Well, F1 said it. So yes, you should bang their knuckles and threaten them to back off because that's your territory if you were Indy. But the other was LL Cool J. Yeah. And frankly, come on, he's a musician. He's not
exactly.
He used an expression that he'd heard before, and I don't think he was at all trying to go, it's better than Indy. No. So I think it's storm in a teacup, as we say in England. I don't think there's anything to this that is. I think it's a faux pas, but that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just because it was LL Cool J, and he's heard that phrase, and he's probably not a big, race fan because I don't think F1 wants to try to steal that phrase. I think that let them have that because, I mean, let's face it, in IndyCar, that is, I bet if you added up the audience, not just the people that attend it because it's huge, but the audience, it's clearly a huge portion of IndyCar's year is the Indy 500. So let them have that one.
The irony is both of them are on ESPN, ABC.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're pretty much out of time, but don't forget we have our wheel-to-wheel show that Chris Medlin and I do every Wednesday, and you can go to our website, speedcitybroadcast.com, to find out about that. But Jonathan, take 30 seconds. We got Imola coming up next for F1. I know you're excited about that one.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite tracks, both as a venue and as an atmosphere. I've been many times to Imola, mainly in bike racing, but I've done Formula One as well. It's tough. I mean, it's built in an old city. It's actually built in an old gladiator field, ironically, but it makes it very hard offline. As we know, there's been tragedy and triumph there. It's a tough circuit. It's not a street circuit, but it feels like it a lot of the time because it's so tight. Because where it's built in, it's by a river, which is why they had to change that corner where Senna went off, because there's a river there and you can't expand it any further. And on the other side, it's houses and restaurants, so you can't change it there either. So it is what it is, but it's good. And some very tight corners, and Acqua Minerale springs to mind. Great places. Not a lot of overtaking, but a great venue.
Yeah, and Chris and I will go into more in depth on Wheel to Wheel on Wednesday about Imola. But all right, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And again, happy Mother's Day, and we'll talk to you next week.
Happy trails.